Приветствую вас. Я
Hello,
Марк.
my name is Mark Grigorian. Watching another discussion in the series of Future Talks. My guest today is a professor at Grigol Robakidze University of Georgia, Paata Zakareishvili, human rights defender, a political scientist, and has also been an MP in the parliament of Georgia, a courageous person. With character and his point of view that does not always coincide with the popular views. Through the discussion, you will have the opportunity to ask questions, and naturally I'm going to read the most relevant ones, addressing them to Mr. Zakareishvili. So provided we're old friends for over 20 years, we are going to be in you singular. So I hope that the viewers are going to understand that. So Paata, Georgia is important for Armenia. From here, from this side of the border, it is obvious for everyone. How is Armenia important for Georgia? Good afternoon, good evening, dear Mark. It's indeed a pleasure to be a host at your series of meetings, and my warmest greetings to be a guest. Well, especially after the war in Karabakh, we now understand that we really underestimate the importance of relations in the South Caucasus. Specifically, we feel how Georgia is important for Armenia, and we try to take that into account to the extent possible. And when I was in the government, I really understood how it was important for us that Armenia is always sure that Georgia is a reliable ally. It is obvious, and I have been in Yerevan in different official delegations and visits, and I've been to Yerevan for 1,000 times. So that's why I know for sure. But of course, the Caucasian world is also very important for us, and relations with the Armenian nation that lasted centuries are quite important. And for Armenians that also lived in different formations and kingdoms of Georgia, they always were present in our country, and that's part of our identity, it's part of our history. So, I mean, the presence of Armenian nation in different parts of the country, and so that is why it's very difficult to imagine the South Caucasus without Georgians and Armenians. And depending on how the relations in Georgia are going to develop, Georgia is going to keep the friendly relations with Armenia, and on that, I'm sure the peace in South Caucasus depends, and that includes the economic and political programs and projects. And they have always been very relevant in all governments of Georgia, though I haven't worked with all of them. But I can tell you that relations with Armenia have been a priority for us every time, and we have always felt that we had to keep friendly relations with Armenia and keep up to the obligations that were enshrined in various agreements between the two countries. And that also, despite the fact that Georgia is more pro-Western and Armenia is not. Okay, well, I've underlined that all the time when there are like high-ranking negotiations between Georgia and Armenia on different issues. Our journalists and the opposition always ask these tricky questions, they think tricky questions on different vectors we move. No, we have different vectors in our movement internationally, but there are also internal vectors of cooperation. That's Georgia-Armenia, which is not less important. And given Armenian-Russian relations and Georgian-Western relations. Now, Western relations exist in Armenia as well. I cannot say that there is no Western movement in Armenia, but there is no Russian movement in Georgia for sure. Though Armenia clearly states its good relations with Russia, I'm sure not less important are the relations of Armenia with the West, Western institutions. In fact, having still different vectors in external politics. So we should apparently be benefiting from that, benefiting from difference in vectors while being close to one another, being in good, historically positive relations. Yes, I agree, but for the last 30 years, I've been observing our independence after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I've never observed that I've never observed any benefits in the difference of the vectors. And I have never seen any pressure from that difference upon the obligations, upon one another. I mean, I don't remember any tense situations, but some economic situations during the war in 2008, some closure of the trail of the train communication or railways. But essentially, these were relations impacting the Georgian economy and naturally Armenian economy, because there was no communication coming from Russia to Armenia anymore. And essentially, I do not remember any episode where on a government level, there could be an overestimation, or maybe there would even be a discussion to change any political positions with Armenia. Well, of course, on the level of discussions in the society, disputes are fine in democratic society with freedom of speech, but that does not anyhow influence the policy of the states. The Georgian government has been changing recently, quite abruptly, and maybe not in the best way, but relations with the neighbors, especially Armenia or Azerbaijan and Turkey, and no one doubts that we can always re-essentialize those and bring some more substance to it. As far as I know, trains are now working, and planes, they land in Georgia and then come to Armenia, and then vice versa. They land in Georgia from Armenia and then move to Russia, though this is something we should not be discussing out loud. So Paata, in Armenia, people really considered it very painful for Georgia allowing military transport of weapons through the territory of Georgia to Azerbaijan during the 44-day war. Meanwhile, Georgia did not allow the transit of weapons initially, then they started allowing from Russia to Armenia. So it is quite a painful thing considered by Armenians. I think that there are certain situations, some painful situations of which people remember for quite a long time. So there has to be a way, I mean, to avoid that, or maybe overcome. Yes, the same way as when Russia was selling weapons to Azerbaijan. So these are essentially some obligations countries have to comply with. Sometimes not very correct information was disseminated. So I know that Georgia essentially followed all the international agreements signed with Azerbaijan and Armenia. Though, of course, we may discuss certain episodes. Georgia also has obligations before Turkey and Azerbaijan. We might discuss that as well. But we have very important relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan. Georgia moves towards NATO. Turkey is an ally, and Russia is enemy number one. There are no enemies in Georgia, but Russia. So on this background, essentially, Georgia had to naturally carry out its obligations. But I don't think that in this horrible war, where an unbelievable quantity of people died, I mean, 44 days. I have also participated in war in a different age, though, but I really cannot understand how how it happened that so many people died during the 44-day war. So I think Georgia was at least following its obligations in the very arduous conditions. So if there are questions and doubts, then essentially that's not the most important factor of the situation that ultimately was created in the South Caucasus. The Georgian component, I should say, was not the most influential factor, right? I mean, Russia and Turkey, they influenced the processes more, even if Georgia behaved in a different way. Well, of course, there were much more powerful players on the stage. And naturally, yes, Georgia was not the strongest player. Well, I would say that brings more honor to you, because it is not very, I mean, it's not easy at all not to be a player where your closest neighbor are in a war. Neighbors are at war. So the obligations, yes, and of course now further fortifying relations between Ankara and Baku. Aren't you concerned that it becomes very strong, that connection? Aren't you? Frankly, no, I'm not. Because with Russia being our enemy, which is not only our enemy, by the way, but Ukraine, for example. So when we have a challenge like Russia, Turkey is not the country that always was for us after 1915, First World War, where the Soviet Union compelled us to sign the declaration and become, or deny our independence and become part of the Soviet Union in order to save the statehood. So that's what we did at that time. Now, Turkey did not do that. Turkey is a member of NATO. They are going for membership in the European Union with problems, though, but they do not step back. The European, I mean, Turkish society is quite developed in terms of European values. There are certain issues they consider controversial, but in this situation, Turkey is an ally of Georgia, supporting the movement towards NATO membership, in addition to the United States. These are the two main lobbyist countries for Georgia's interests, United States and Turkey, which are very strong in NATO, and Azerbaijan, with whom we have strategic relations. All these oil pipes are going through Georgia. All these energy projects, they could have passed through Armenia. It's a different story, but that's the situation. That was the situation. Now Turkey is a transport corridor for the Caspian resources to arrive in Georgia. So it's quite a strong alliance. I'm really concerned that Armenia is not being part of it, though in the nearest future, I hope Armenia will also become part of the Caucasian context. But I agree, I personally agree, though there are people in Georgia who see some threats in further improvement of relations with Turkey, but most of the people in the population vote for those who want better relations, stronger relations with Turkey, better relations in the Black Sea region and transport and everything. So I mean, that's the type of assistance. So I have always been supporting the idea of NATO membership and good relations with Azerbaijan and Turkey. But I have also been underlining that Georgia is the country that does not use its resources for lobbying in Armenia against Turkey. But of course, we also lobby the interests of Armenia in terms of security. But of course, Georgia has its interests, and it's the country that has good relations with all the three countries, with Baku, with Ankara, and with Yerevan. So we could be mediators. in many issues, like, for example, the exchange of prisoners of war. And that was mostly the achievement of the Americans who involved Turkey into the process. That's what I think. So this is still a good example that Georgia can play a positive role. By the way, Georgia being the only country which is not interested in the lands of none of the countries, neither Armenia nor Azerbaijan nor Turkey. So I mean, we're not in a dispute apart with this monastery complex with Azerbaijan issue that can be solved in numerous other ways, apart from actions that many people demand. But it's still an issue that can be solved. I mean, it's not considered a no way out issue. So I'm sure Georgia can be a reliable partner for all the countries and the mediator for peace in the Caucasus. Okay, Paata. I am going to draw an analogy so that it's clear to you how hard it is for Armenia to normalize its relations with Turkey. I would even put aside the 44-day war and try to draw an analogy. For example, Russia says, you know, Georgia, let's forget the past. Let's forget everything that happened and become friends. I think you will not go for that right away. You will raise the issue, which is very important and painful for you. That's the issue of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Call it the way you wish. So in our case, with Turkey, we have a whole row of issues. Number one is the recognition of the fact that they killed 1.5 million people. The fact of that, and that's a very important political, historical, moral, and legal factor, which is a very, very strong wall between Armenia and Turkey. So in the Armenian identity, the issue of these innocent victims is important. And it's also important in terms of Turkish identity. That's the denial of genocide, because it's important in terms of further development of Turkish identity as well. So in this respect, relations between Armenia and Turkey are very, very difficult, just incredibly difficult. We should become a split personality here. I agree. Very, very complicated issue. And the same with Russia. I do a lot of studies on conflicts in the world, and I see that some issues which are not being solved should be left aside for a certain period of time and solve the economic issues like opening of borders. Especially in 2008 and 2009, there was some kind of a football diplomacy, as you called it, between Armenia and Turkey. You even reached a level where there was kind of a text, serious document, the Zurich protocols, right? Yes, yes. So they ended up with something. And the issue of Karabakh then, not the issue of genocide, but the issue of Karabakh did not allow going forward. Now, when the issue is solved, though not finally, then maybe you can go closer to the solution. And I know many Turkish diplomats when I was a government official. I traveled a lot to Istanbul and met a lot of experts and high-ranking politicians on the issue of Abkhazia and a number of other matters. But these people do Caucasus, and there are Turkish experts there who mentioned that they were ready to start good relations with Armenia. In fact, there is a lot of diplomacy. And I have also met the former ambassador to OSCE, and they all understand that improvement of relations with Armenia is very important for Turkey. There is a number of people with whom you should not discuss the issues, though. This way or another, keeping it this way, in this grasp, immovable, when a large segment of the border is closed, disturbs both Turkey and Armenia. Though even that after signing the ceasefire agreement, there were issues of unblocking of all the transport routes raised in that document. So I guess something could have been started. I'm sure the issue of genocide will never be ignored. But as you also said, I'm quite openly talking to the Georgian society. If I were a citizen of Armenia, I know the situation in Armenia. I love Armenia and Armenians. It's part of my identity. It's the South Caucasus. It's a precious situation to me, though it's very painful to see what happened between the nations. But if I were a citizen of Armenia, I would have definitely said more courageously that we should never forget the issue, yes, but we should also continue dealing with others. That's what I always tell to my colleagues in Georgia. You should not become the hostages of certain problems, like the Abkhazian issue. Yes, it's a very important issue, a very painful one for us. But stopping, for example, the export of Georgian wine to Russia because of that is wrong. That's what I think. Of course, I cannot compare that to the Armenian context, but there are a number of issues that have to be solved. Or if the issue of genocide is not solved, I'm frankly sure that sooner or later the Turkish society will get there, because that society develops. It's a big burden of the issue of genocide laid on the shoulders of the Turkish nation, and I'm sure that sooner or later it will be resolved, and the peoples of the two countries have to be ready for that, with all the other systems working well, like the economy, transport, communication, etc. So many issues can be resolved apart from the situation we're looking at now. Okay, so initially you're saying solve the economic issue, the transport issue, open the borders. Yes, well, it's not up to me to dictate how it's going to happen, with all respect. Naturally, I'm full of respect and love to Armenian nation. I understand how painful it may be. I have many friends in Armenia and I meet them often, and I have a lot of discussions with them. I understand how painful it can be. But I do not want to bring the Georgian discourse into the Armenian context, because the Russian factor is unacceptable for us, and it's very important at the same time. So I do not want to put Russia under doubt for Armenians only because it's unacceptable for us. I do not want to do that at all. So people who do not want, people who do not know me should know that it's not anyhow my mission or my goal. Nevertheless, there was a big elephant in the South Caucasus for quite a long period of time after the First World War, when the Russian troops, Soviet troops, I would say, essentially invaded the South Caucasus and finished the occupation of Turkey. From that moment, exactly 100 years have passed. It happened in 1921, occupation of Georgia. So essentially, for 100 years, that elephant started to grow and came to the region. That's Turkey. It's a fact, whether we like it or not. So, and then suddenly the second elephant emerged in that small place. Russia never went anywhere, but Turkey came there as well. So Turkey came to the Caucasus with two phenomena: the civilizational one through Azerbaijan, meaning culture, language, religion, identity, and institutions through Georgia, like NATO, European context, Black Sea security, etc. And Russia is essentially moving through Georgia civilizationally, like Orthodox Church and the language, etc. All of that is being now pushed out. So with Armenia, they have relations only through Georgia. There is no border. It's not a challenge for Armenia. The challenge was Karabakh, and the issue has to be solved finally. But I'm sure that the sovereignty of Armenia is not under doubt. Well, at least in Baku, I should say, or in Ankara, everyone's sure that no one's thinking about the sovereignty of Armenia, though Armenians think that this is an existential challenge. Nevertheless, we have to be solving these issues, and everything depends on Armenia. Well, unique, very, very unique, I should say, elections were held in Armenia, quite competitive and quite unexpectedly, for me at least, most of the people voted for Pashinyan. So naturally, he has the responsibility. It's not just a victory, it's also a responsibility. So he is going to decide, and no one's going to disturb him. Hence, a very serious challenge for the Republic of Armenia now. And another decision to be made, to stay with Russia or maybe start thinking about Turkey. You see, I've never been saying relations with Azerbaijan, though it would be the best option, but I don't see it now. However, through Turkey and Europe and Brussels, sooner or later, you will have to deal with that situation, sooner or later. And Georgia could have played a role there, but frankly, I do not yet see anyone in our government to think about that way. At least try to play a role of bringing stability to South Caucasus. Okay, another very important issue of security. The issue for security is quite high on the agenda for the Republic of Armenia, of course, doubtlessly. So right now, there are Azerbaijani forces on the territory of Armenia. It is a serious problem in the sense of security, first of all. So if we raise the question that way, I mean, we say that we're a small country, and in terms of security, someone should help us, and I guess the situation is the same in Georgia. So it turns out that at the moment where Georgia asks NATO, Armenia asks Russia for security. That's the historical way, the traditional one. And next to security, there's also the soft power coming in. You understand? Yeah, the language, of course, books, television, tourists, etc. By the way, I think tourists from Russia can be quite a curious soft power in Georgia as well. There are quite many, by the way. And, so that's also a very interesting situation. The civilizational one and the economic at the same time. Yes, I fully agree. But Russia is not going anywhere. It will not vanish, it will be there. So, but Russia doesn't have that energy anymore. And how Armenia behaves at this moment is very important. Well, what happened should not have happened naturally, but Armenia is going to play an important role now. How it's going to behave, how it's going to choose. It's going to keep relations with Russia only. That's one issue. No one can doubt that. But I think that the Western context should also be very important. Well, France naturally supports Armenia on all issues. Yeah, they can find more in the European Union. The European Union is quite interested. So in Georgia, we had the political crisis, as you may remember. The opposition wouldn't go to the parliament. And our French colleagues arriving in the region allowed for finding a solution. So Europeans are quite interested in the South Caucasus, incredibly interested in issues of the South Caucasus, are ready to solve issues in the South Caucasus, but a lot depends on Armenia. Frankly, I do not want to do any anti-Russian propaganda here, but these resources are quite limited. So in 5 years, maybe less, in Azerbaijan, between Azerbaijan and Russia, I guess, another drama is going to take place. The solution of issue on the territory of Karabakh, and how the Russian peacekeepers are going to stay there. Well, so it's not just a military base like Gyumri or the illegal one in Abkhazia, where they also have a port there and aviation and railways. So it's like a full communication and ammunition. and military present in Karabakh do not have that capacity, do not have that power. So they're not quite desirable for Azerbaijan. So that's why in maybe 4.5 years, that issue will be solved. And Azerbaijan is going to come up with certain requirements. The fact that Erdogan traveled to Shushi is not just by chance, naturally. He's not going to go there for architecture. It's just a demonstration of some geopolitical ambitions. And Russia is going to take that into account. And it's really highly appreciated how patient the Armenians now are. And they ultimately created the statehood. And it's a new period for Armenia and Georgia. Not quite a long time of statehood, and now the second wave. So how can we make use of that independence in absence or presence of Russia? Well, Georgia denies presence of Russia, so Armenia apparently will have to rely on the situation in which Russia is not going to be permanently present there, as Armenians would like it to. It's not my business, but Russia will be present in Armenia, given its interests, naturally. So that is why the Armenian nation is now facing an existential choice where to go. So they have to start building the Armenian statehood now. And with a lot of drama to it, unfortunately. Of course, we lose things, you have lost things, but so the issue is the price we pay for statehood. And that's why I understand the tormenting of the Armenian nation and the suffering when they think of what can happen in 5 years. So I don't think any threats to sovereignty, but I have to apologize if I have insulted anyone, but we have to be able to find some common solutions, because sooner or later this issue is going to be raised. So I think it's going to be very important. I respect Levon Terpetresyan a lot. I think he's the most renowned politician in the South Caucasus after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I was really inspired with everything this person said and did, and I'm full of respect to that person. So I think such Armenians exist in Armenia. People who are openly talking to their nations. Well, of course, there are Armenians who talk to the nation this way. There are Armenians who talk openly to Azerbaijan and Turks. Well, of course, there are such people. Of course, the Armenian society is quite diverse in its opinions. There are lots of debates. So I'm sure that you know that very well. After you have lost in a war, you start thinking where to go, how to go, and how to provide for security, and how to define priorities, what the priorities are for us, not only in foreign policy, but also in the economy. I have just a small comment to this. In 4 years already, by the way, not 4.5, the conversations about the Russian peacekeepers will take place in 4 years. By the way, despite the fact that they are not many, and they are not a very big force militarily, they are an important factor of stability and serenity, because the residents of Karabakh or Stepanakert, all those villages which are under Armenian control, they feel themselves quite safer with Russian presence. So I have been to Karabakh several times after the war, and I should say that it's quite surprising. Where there's peacekeepers, they like to be courteous and polite, and it's obvious they like it. And of course, I like that a lot. You like courtesy anyway. So this is my understanding. At large, there is a very serious, I would even say global, well, at least regional issue for sure. It is the establishment and maintenance of mutually beneficial balance of interests between Georgia and Armenia. Because that balance of interests is established at several levels. We've been conversing geopolitics recently a lot. We say Russia, we say West, but I mean the interstate relations between Armenia and Georgia. It is this ability to keep this balance, the ability to help one another, and the ability to say that there are obligations before another country. So it is also this balance of communities closer to the borders, where the largest, the second largest ethnic group is Armenians in Georgia. The first is Azerbaijanis, and there is a whole region fully populated, almost fully populated by Armenians, that Javakheti. And there is another one where we have very loyal citizens of Georgia among Armenians. Quite correct. I traveled a lot. I love these people, and when I was a public official, my portfolio covered that issue as well. But they're quite loyal and quite patient, and I think we owe a lot to this group, because climatically it's not the best part of Georgia. It's quite cold. It can be quite cold there, so we're obliged to invest more resources there, which is being done, but more has to be, and we have to be better perceiving the situation. There are so many Armenians in Tbilisi, and they mastered the Georgian language as native, and they are part of our organic identity, mentality, and there are many friends among them. Well, of course, most importantly, unfortunately, the conflict took its toll for so many years. It persisted, and Georgians and Georgian Armenians were quite concerned, and the war was so devastating, but I'm sure nothing of a kind that would make the Georgian authorities be concerned. People understood that the emotions of the Armenian ethnic group did not exceed the threshold of politeness and courtesy. And they were trying to be more neutral. They were trying not to harm the process and not to harm the relations. So that's the treasure. Our diversity is the treasure, and I'm personally proud of that. And more Georgians are, especially the youth. So I'm so glad that the young generation understands how rich we are, how wealthy we are with diversity. Though there are some explosions sometimes, which is of great concern for me, but it's manageable, especially problems based on Christian-Islamic relations. There have been several clashes, quite unpleasant episodes with some irreversible consequences. And that was a resistance between Orthodox, Christian, and Muslim worlds. Unfortunately, there are also problems between the Georgian Orthodox and Armenian Apostolic Church. Well, that's there, but it's more clergy related. And these issues can be regulated by the leaders of our churches. And they simply need some goodwill and determination to do that. It's a definitely easier issue if they want to solve it naturally. And they do not want to solve it, and that's a different problem. So, and I'm more critical to my compatriots, by the way, in this respect. But Orthodox and Islam, this is much more fundamental, and the society has to become part of resolution. Okay, I'm quite critical to the Armenian side on this issue, naturally. And to add a little bit of context to what you have said, in the beginning of the 1920s, when Armenia had no statehood, a situation occurred by the beginning of the 20th century where Armenia had no statehood for 600 years. However, the Armenian language existed, the church was there, Armenians continued to consider them Armenians and speak Armenian language and create literature. Hence, the largest cultural centers of Armenians were Tbilisi and Baku. Tbilisi was a very significant, very large cultural center, and Istanbul, not Baku, was incredibly important for Western Armenians, and indeed, in that period of time, in the 19th century, the Armenians of Istanbul were also French-speaking, So they were trilingual, Armenian, Turkish, and French. And the communication with Europe, especially France, was implemented through Istanbul. For the Eastern Armenians, it went through Tbilisi and St. Petersburg. Well, this is now the floor that I give to you, and that will be the last, and we'll wrap up our discussion. Of course, if there are no questions. Well, I'm still proud where I find some old books in the libraries in Armenian, and it says Tiflis, published in Tiflis. That's how it said, Tbilisi. It was such an open and tolerant city. It was the Caucasian Babylon, where all the peoples felt themselves at home. Very beautiful houses built by great Armenian millionaires who loved their city, and they were in love with Tbilisi, and these beautiful houses which were built against the architectural mind of Paris, essentially built in high competitiveness with architects of the world who were in Paris mostly at the time. So I'm highly admiring all the architectural investments Armenians have made. Well, there are many Muslims in Tbilisi, of course, with their heritage, lots of architectural monuments there, Islamic culture, Armenian culture. Well, Georgia as such essentially kept different parts of its kingdoms and somehow managed to maintain these traditions under different reigns, Iran and Turkey, and we kind of maneuvered through those situations. But provided we were Christian nations, we always gave refuge to Armenian merchants and clergy. So I'm personally proud that these relations between Armenia and Georgia took place through centuries, and many are proud of that. There are even different TV programs where we try to explain the origins of different buildings, edifices in the center of Tbilisi. So it was a center of Caucasus at the time. So I hope that the events that took place in the end of last year will simply remind us that it should never happen again. We should never forget. There's no other way. It's only the peaceful way. So we think that the nations of the Caucasus have to find uh, a common way of doing things. Otherwise, we will be divided by the larger states. So I dream of the time where we will be in the European Union. After 2 world wars in Europe, French and Germans suddenly understood that it was not the way anymore. It was a catastrophe. And people who took part in the war in 1946, the war 1945, the war ended in 1949 already. The European Union as such started to exist. So yes, we have done the same in Abkhazia, in Ossetia, in Karabakh. I mean, it's just by virtue, it has to happen. And it's the Caucasian chain of mountains, the only one that we have. I mean, we can't create something common. It will really be very frustrating to miss this opportunity. It's a great chance to find the common ways of doing things. Paata, provided neither you or us have oil or gas, thanks God, yes. So we definitely both agree on this larger initiation. Thank you very much. Thanks to you, and thanks to you. And I think that it was quite a useful discussion. My guest was Paata Zakareishvili, a professor at the University of Grigol. Grigol Robakidze. And it's all the best. Thank you. Thank you.